Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We are going to get started in a few minutes. We're going to wait for everyone to hop on the call. We've got a little over 50 members joining today. So again, welcome, and we'll get started in a few minutes. While you're waiting, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. The chat is the icon that's sort of the bottom center of the screen, and it's got a little sort of text box next to it. And throughout the program, once we get started, feel free to type in your question in the chat, and we will pepper those questions in throughout the conversation with our curator. So again, welcome. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Welcome, everyone, to our most recent edition of our Curator Conversations, a program that is exclusively for you, members of the VMHC. And we're so glad that you all are here today. I am going to do just a brief introduction, and then I will hand it off to our wonderful curator, because I know you don't want to hear me talk all day. So first off, thank you so much for your continued support as members of the VMHC. We truly couldn't do what we do without your support, and we are just so grateful for it, especially during this time that we're all experiencing together. Throughout the program, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. It is located at the bottom center of your screen, and it looks a bit like a text box in like a comic strip. So if you click on it, you can see the full chat, and we'll try to get to as many questions that are in there throughout the program. Today, I'm excited to introduce our curator. He is the Laura M. Robbins Senior Curator of Museum Collections, Bill Rasmussen, and he's going to talk to us today about one of our newest exhibitions, A Landscape Saved, the Garden Club at 100. So without further ado, Bill, take it away.
Thank you, Elizabeth. we're going to do something that we've never done before. We're going to give you a virtual tour of an exhibition. And because I have two very capable colleagues participating in this with me, I think we're going to be able to pull it off. And the purpose of this is to inspire you to come to the building, to come to the museum and look at the actual exhibition. So I'm going to give you an overview. We're going to stop at some of the objects along the way and talk about those. And we start with, at the very beginning, we have this giant photograph, 8 feet tall, of the Shenandoah National Park, to make the point that one of the goals of the Garden Club, and of course this exhibition, the reason for this exhibition is the 100th anniversary of the Garden Club of Virginia. So we want to look at all that organization has accomplished in that long period of time. And one of their goals from the start, and certainly with us today, is land preservation, and no image makes that point better than this view of the Shenandoah National Park. The Garden Club participated in educating the public on the importance of establishing this park. It's enormous. It's 300 square miles, 79,000 acres. It's almost as many as 79,000 football fields. Think of it that way. It runs all the way from just north of Waynesboro to almost to Front Royal. It's a huge accomplishment, and it shows. It's the prime example of the landscape save that the club brought about. So after you look at that, we go around the corner and show you what could have happened about landscapes being lost. This is a photograph from our own collection of a mining operation in Tom Creek in Wise County, which is at the very bottom below the valley, at the very bottom of Southwest Virginia. And the date is right about the same time, about 1910 to 20. And this sort of mining operation was going on, and this could have happened throughout the valley had the Garden Club and others not started this movement in Virginia. Now, it was a national movement. Teddy Roosevelt was a spokesman nationally, and he made this wonderful statement. In fact, do not let selfish men or greedy interests shred your country of its beauty. Your children shall judge you. So he's speaking on the national level, and on the local level, on the Virginia level, it's the Garden Club working for this. It's fascinating to look at a photograph like this, and there were no guidelines in place to prevent this from happening in Virginia at the time. And looking at this image, it appears these people were proud of what they're doing, and now we're thankful that this didn't continue. So we move right from that to an image bringing us back to Virginia. This is an image that came from a booklet, Scenes and Places of Interest along the Norfolk and Western Railroad, about 1906. And the railroad was one of the first entities to recognize the importance of the landscape, of the unspoiled landscape. And the railroad hadn't spoiled very much of it with its railroad tracks that were put for freight. And they realized that they could take advantage of those tracks that were already there and perhaps develop a passenger business and earn money that way. So that's how the railroad got involved in it. And we show another photograph from our collection of this car stuck in the mud along Route 1 near Dumfries about 1915 to make the point that the Model T Ford had been introduced in 1908. It was extremely successful. About 1920, when the Garden Club was founded, there were a lot of cars there and a lot of roads. It had to be built because you see the cars did not do well with mud. The donkeys and horses did much better. And when the roads were built, that meant all sorts of things were added along the roadside, particularly billboards, which became one of the the removal of the billboards became one of the major projects of the Garden Club. And we have a section later on the show that looks into that in detail. We feature next a group of these early founders of the Garden Club, and they were really remarkable. And you qualified for your picture going on the wall if you made a profound statement, and all of these ladies did. Up on the wall, we have a picture of one of the quotes cited. This is Juanita Patterson, who was the first president of the Garden Club, and she was so important. We have a blow up of her. You can stand and right next to her and feel like you're talking to her. She was amazing. Her obituary stated that her home was called Hillcrest, which is in Richmond, the big subdivision now, 1,000 acres. And it said it was, the obituary said it was filled with gardens, large gardens that she designed all by herself, and is one of the show places of Virginia. So she was a remarkable person, and she keeps coming up in this exhibition because she was a force. She was way ahead of her time. And all of these ladies would make the statement that we need to promote preservation. We need to learn more about horticulture from one another. And I'll get to horticulture in a minute. And we got to have a purpose other than just educating ourselves about horticulture. We've got to get the public involved in this too, or we're not going to have an excuse for being. We've got to have a reason. We've got to have a purpose. And so they take on that purpose and with a vengeance. And so we move from here to a section that talks about horticulture. If you go to a garden club meeting nowadays, and there's a flower arranging exhibition or contest going on, the air is electric. People are really excited about it. And so it occurred to us that some of the public might need some help in understanding why. So we put on the wall 2 quotes by Thomas Jefferson. He says, "No occupation is so delightful to me as the culture of the earth, and no culture comparable to that of the garden." And then he said, "The greatest service that can be rendered to any country is to add a useful plant to its culture." The plants he added were olive trees and North Italian rice. And we have this, what you're looking at now, this brochure that talks about some of the cultivated flowers. The rose, the lily, the daffodil, narcissus, have been pursued by the garden clubs for 100 years now. And they've had test gardens in the various chapters. And I just cite you one statistic. In 1946, in Ravenna, they already had 360 varieties of daffodils planted there. And so this was significant because different plants grow differently in different parts of Virginia. It depends on the climate, depends on the soil. And these test gardens determined which ones would do well in Virginia. And if you're growing some of these plants in your garden, you probably have to thank the garden club for the work in pioneering which ones to pursue, which varieties to pursue. So this was a Narcissus show exhibition, very early date, 1931, sponsored by the Albemarle Club. So as we move along this this wall, we can see they're also interested, as this sign from about 1930 says, native trees, shrubs, and wildflowers. Garden club members were as interested in wildflowers and shrubs and trees as they were in cultivated flowers. And they took on the dogwood tree, and this is a poster from 1932, and over the decades they've initiated campaigns to plant dogwoods. For example, in 1967 they managed to get 3,620 dogwood trees planted. So that's been and that's the state flower of Virginia, and it's to our benefit that they did all that. Now, we asked the garden club members to help us, because if most of us would go to one of their garden their display competitions, we would need some help in understanding why the picture on the left gets the gold, gets the medal, and why the one in the middle is not quite as good, and why the one on the right is a little bit less successful. And so they came up with, they used the same ingredients in all of these. And we have a color wheel there to make it the point that color was the subject of this particular exercise, to use color. And you notice the color wheel it reminds you of what you see with rainbows. This is the way light is broken down. And the point is that colors that are opposite on the color wheel, like red and green, if you put them next to each other, they jump. Or blue and orange, they jump. So it really, and the colors that are close to one another on the color wheel work together in a very harmonious way. So if we go back up to I'll give you an explanation of each one. This one's so successful because it's remarkably well balanced. And it's very tight, and there's something going on everywhere in it, but it's balanced. And they also make the point by putting a different background that can have an effect on the success of your display. And one reason this is important is because these are lessons not only to use for a flower display, but you're supposed to use these when you plan your garden as well. And you should be looking at color and relationships of colors to one another. So if we move to the next one, it's strong, but it's a little bit top heavy, and you notice sort of a gap in the middle. So it's not as successful as the other one. And the display on the right, well, it's in bands. You see there are bands at the top that sort of lead you horizontally. There's a band at the very bottom, and there's actually a band with the 3 red flowers that grab you like bullseyes. So that one is less successful. So now you know which one would have won the ribbon as the best design, the one on the left. And we have here an actual chart called the Crosby color chart. It was invented around 1905 or so, and we have a letter on display next to it from one of the former presidents of the Garden Club, talking about how this chart was actually used by judges to make their decisions. And it was also used by people putting the flower arrangements together to decide how to play, opposite colors against one another, how to use the complementary colors, how to use the adjoining colors, and to get the best effect. So there's a lot to color. I came across a quote recently from Winston Churchill, who was a painter. He wasn't a bad painter, and he was asked to explain color. And he said, when I die and go to heaven, I'm going to spend a good part of the first 1,000,000 years trying to figure out color. So it's a complex subject. Some people have a real gift for it, and most of us are not Claude Monet. But the people who put together the best of these flower arrangements understand color and can see things. They can look at a color and tell you this has such and such color in it, and that's just a God-given gift. We also have on the right an interesting little booklet that probably ought to be reprinted and sold again. Helpful hints on conserving wildflowers. And guess who wrote it? It's Juanita Patterson, who seems to be in on everything. And it's very useful because she talks about there's certain wildflowers that you could go and pick as many as you want. It's not going to hurt anything, but it'll grow back in plenty. There's certain flowers you can pick a fair amount of them, and they'll still grow back. And there's certain flowers that they're just too rare. You better not touch any of them. So it's a very useful booklet, and it's still relevant today. So
Bill,
we move now to, yes.
Bill, while you're moving through, one question I have is, so the Garden Club is 100 years old here in Virginia. Where does the Virginia Garden Club fall in relation to other states' garden clubs and their founding?
Well, I don't know that, well, there were some clubs in the state that existed before 1920. And when the Laura Wheelwright, the president of the James River Garden Club, brought together 7 of them in 1920 to form a federation, obviously those 7 and hers, the James River Garden Club, already were in existence. So they brought them together, and the purpose of this federation, this garden club, was so that the different branches could learn from one another. they could learn about horticulture from one another. And then as she pointed out, we got to do more than that than just entertain ourselves and educate ourselves. We got to educate the public as well. So as I said, it was a national movement. I don't think there was any state ahead of Virginia, and certainly in terms of the project of Historic Garden Week, which is the signature event of the Garden Club. No other state has come close to that, and nothing was as early as that, because that was in the end of the 1920s. So if we go back to the screen, we're looking at a section about preserving the unique landscape, and it was very different back then, around 1920s and 30s, than it is today. Around 1970, everything changed, and the whole landscape was threatened because there are pollutants, as we all know, because we're all into the preservation of it. Now there are pollutants in the air and the water and soil everywhere. But around 1930, there were certain spots that needed to be preserved. And so you're looking at two examples that are really fascinating, because on the left is Goshen Pass. And Goshen Pass was saved innumerable times by the Garden Club, because it was threatened first by an electric company in 1929, which wanted to build a dam across this magnificent pass that comes through the mountains to form the Maury River near Lexington. They wanted to build a dam that would be 53 feet high and 450 feet long, and it would have just destroyed Goshen Pass, all the beauty of the land, the plants there, the insects, rare insects that are there. And over the years, Goshen Pass was repeatedly saved. In the 1930s, there were efforts to change the beautiful winding road there with a straight highway. In the 1940s, another effort to do the dam. In the 1950s, there were efforts to cut timber there. In the 1960s, the road issue came back. 2013, the Boy Scouts wanted to put their enormous national jamboree right around the corner. And the Garden Club was involved in all these efforts that stopped all of that from happening. And as a result, Goshen Pass survives. And the picture on the right is an even more remarkable picture. It's the Rappahannock River at Fredericksburg. There was a proposed dam at a place called Salem Church, and this beautiful, unpolluted Rappahannock River here was going to be blocked by a dam that was much larger. It was like 5 times as high as Goshen, 240 feet high. It would have flooded 40,000 acres of farmland for 29 miles west. The tallest dam on the East Coast in 1967, when this was proposed, it would have cost $80 million. It would have destroyed an immense amount of wildlife as well as the farmland. It would have destroyed 40,000 acres. That's half the size of the Shenandoah National Park. So the Garden Club was involved in preventing that from happening. And since we're talking about unique landscapes, we thought we would bring in as well 2 landscapes that Thomas Jefferson was involved with. This, of course, is the University of Virginia. And the Garden Club was responsible from 1947 to 2008 of restoring all of the gardens behind the 10 pavilions that flanked the rotunda. And so they're forever linked to this architecture. And it's very important architecture. In 1976, at the bicentennial, the time of the bicentennial, the American Institute of Architects invited its members to vote on the most successful example of architecture in the 200-year history of America. And they voted Jefferson's Lawn, the rotunda, the pavilions, and the gardens behind it. So the Garden Club is forever linked to the greatest example of architecture in the country. That's something to be proud of. But here's an example of a garden, of just a small garden, but it's an important garden. It was owned by Ann Bethel Spencer, who you see there, in Lynchburg. And the photo is about 1947, but she was earlier. She was a major poet who was a leading figure of the Harlem Renaissance. And she wrote a lot of her poetry sitting in her house overlooking that garden. And her home became a salon for renowned Black figures for decades. And in 2009, the Garden Club restored her garden. And there we have another Jefferson landscape. Some of you may remember this one. This was 1973. The legislators decided they needed more space. And they decided they would destroy Jefferson's lawn, just the open expanse that makes the Capitol work in one of the most important buildings in the world, with what critics described as the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And the Garden Club participated in the opposition to this with what most people considered was a folly, with the statement, "No more building on Capitol Square." So they were amongst those who protested this, and of course it didn't happen, and a good solution was found, and the offices were added underground. So you got the same effect, but the lawn was kept. So the Garden Club was making important contributions on very important episodes in our history. So we're back to the Shenandoah National Park, because that's so important. The scene that we looked at in the opening photograph, and we thought we better prove the point that the Garden Club really did do something with this. So this is one of several letters in their files, addressed to Juanita Patterson, of course, 1926, saying that this is from the director of publicity for the campaign to establish the park, thanking the Garden Club for help in the educational work. And so that certainly proves the point. And this couldn't be a greater accomplishment, so we highlighted it a second time here. And you, by the way, you can go online and just go on the website for the Shenandoah National Park, or any if you look for Shenandoah National Park, and there they seem like there's an infinity of numbers of just spectacular photographs of the land there. Well, one of the major projects that the Garden Club took in its early years was what they called billboard blight. And this was caused, as I mentioned earlier, by the advent of the Model T Ford, which you see in a wonderful photograph we found in our collection on the left. And billboards were erected all along the roads. And we looked for an ugly billboard from the period. But of course, nobody saves ugly things, so there were none to be found. So our designer made one of his own. It's a rather pretty billboard, but it's based on the Ringling Brothers ad that you see in the photograph you're looking right now, which is in the Garden Club archives. And it talks about the Ringling Brothers coming to Richmond, so that seemed an appropriate theme for our modern billboard that's in the exhibition. And you can see that not only were billboards established, but the buildings were just wallpapered with these advertisements. And this was what the Garden Club fought against, and they were very successful. On the right, you see at the top a photograph of I'm guessing around 1950. You see some early cars there. Some of us can even remember the old Petersburg Turnpike, and it was memorable only because it was so ugly. And you see all of this stuff along the side of the road. And the Garden Club became famous because a number of the ladies, this made the headlines of the Richmond Times-Dispatch, a number of the ladies went out with their chauffeurs and yardmen and their axes and cut down 4,000 billboards. So that's one of the more interesting bits of information in the show. Suzanne Massey was one of the early founders. She opposed that, but she also opposed the fact that some people were painting signs on rocks. So up on the Blue Ridge Parkway area, she went with her chauffeur and yardman, and they painted over the rocks that had advertisements painted on them. So these ladies were pretty remarkable in that campaign. Down in the bottom right, you see what we're blessed with today, and we sort of take that for granted. One of the early founders said, wouldn't it be nice if people, if we work so well and accomplish so much with highway beautification, that when people enter the state of Virginia, they'll know they're in Virginia. because we already have a great history, but if we add to that the beauty of the landscape, think what we will accomplish. And there are a number of places in Virginia where that happens, where you go and you see something as beautiful as this, and it's not marred, and it's not an accident that it's there. So, Elizabeth, did you have a question, or you? Okay.
I was signaling to someone that I was in a Zoom call because we are all getting used to new technology.
Right. Next, let's see. We go to World War II. A lot of Garden Club members thought a lot about whether they should just stop what they're doing in World War II, but no, they decided to contribute during that time as well. And you see a church on the left, and on the right you see the stained glass windows for it. This is a church near Normandy. It's a 12th century Gothic cathedral, St. Martin, in the town of Vers-sur-Mer. And the Garden Club replaced 10 windows that had been destroyed. And they were particularly interested in this church because that was and this site near Normandy, because of course the Normandy invasion was there, but it was also the spot where a little more than a decade earlier, the Richard Evelyn Byrd, the navigator, when he flew across the ocean, he had landed, he crash landed on the beach there, and the villagers had come to his rescue there. So there are two reasons to give some attention to this. And also underneath one of these windows is a plaque that honors 30 soldiers who were killed, who were related, and part of the Garden Club community. They were fathers, husbands, sons. So it's a special spot for the Garden Club of Virginia. They also helped the English, of course. They sent 10,000 pounds of clothing and goods to Britain. So here we look at some of the restorations of the Garden Club restorations. I think this is what the Garden Club is most famous for. When I first looking into this subject, this is what came to my mind. They've restored more than 50 gardens in the state, and these are gardens in public places that are tied, in many cases, to very important houses that were the homes of important historical figures. It all started with Kenmore, which you see on the left, which was threatened by developers who were going to develop the neighborhood and take all of the land of this plantation. It was a plantation home of Colonel Fielding and Mary Washington Lewis, the sister of Washington. And so the Kenmore Foundation was established to save the house, and they turned to the Garden Club and said, can you plant some gardens for us? And the Garden Club members had to figure out how to finance it. And they came up with the idea of Start Garden Week. And they said, we've been doing this ourselves. We've been going around to look at others, the gardens, and they called these pilgrimages they took, and they really loved doing it. And they said, why don't we offer this to the public and charge them a fee? And they did, and then one of them commented right afterwards, this was more successful than we ever dreamed. And it has been remarkably successful. They've poured more than $17 million into these 50 garden restorations. It's estimated the economic impact over the proceeds over the last 50 years alone was more than $500 million. On the right, you see two other the really important gardens they did. The one on the top right is Stratford Hall, which is one of the first houses that they worked with, and they established a garden there. And then in recent years, they found that they've dug more, so to speak, and found more information, and redid the garden and given a garden that's more accurate than the one that was restored in 1930. So that's what you're looking at today. And then the other one, just below it, is the garden at Bacon's Castle, which is really remarkable. If you look in the detail at the bottom, you see the house there. It's Arthur Allen's house is called Bacon's Castle because Nathaniel Bacon, during his rebellion, took over the house in 1676. It was built about a decade earlier by Arthur Allen, who obviously had been to England and obviously brought back a very talented brick mason from England, because the Jacobean brickwork is rather extraordinary. And the Garden Club in the 1980s had archaeologists out there, and they discovered a pleasure garden, which you see there. Now, most gardens, it was thought that all gardens in America in the 1600s grew produce. They weren't pleasure gardens. They were there to grow crops, grow to feed the table. They were kitchen gardens. And here they found extraordinary evidence that it was a pleasure garden. And what happened was that Arthur Allen's son had gone to England as well and learned that this was in vogue, pleasure gardens were in vogue, and he built one there. That's in Surrey County. This is such a stunning discovery that it was on the front page of the New York Times in the 1980s. So here's a map of some of the gardens restored by the Garden Club. The different maps that the Garden Club has put out because they keep adding to it, so the list keeps growing. But you can see they're all over the state. So in this fourth wall of the exhibition, we get to about 1970, when, as I said earlier, so the whole game sort of changed. Because the whole environment, the air, the water, the land, all was threatened by pollutants. And you see in the bottom left the Rachel Carson and her book Silent Spring, and that was published in 1962. She was invited to speak by one of the Garden Club groups in the 1960s. They were really on top of their game to recognize her. This was the alarm bell in the middle of the night that let America know that, you know, we had enjoyed great prosperity since World War II, but it came with a huge economic price. And that became clear, and it resulted in major changes on both the national, on the national level, the state level, and within the Garden Club. And on the national level, a major act was passed, the National Environmental Policy Act, called NEPA, which has been called the Magna Carta of environmental laws, which stated that any federal agency that's involved in any activity that's going to affect the environment had to do a study about that and get clearance to proceed with that project. And then in Virginia, Governor Holton established a committee that had Garden Club members on it that led to the establishment of the Department of Environmental Quality in Virginia. And within the Garden Club, there was a new emphasis on this subject. We have here a wide display to make the point that the Garden Club of Virginia is not a Richmond organization. It's a statewide organization. It has 48 chapters all over the state. And we put up pictures here and little accounts of, I think, 14 projects that have been done by members, by the chapters of the Garden Club. And these are projects that are extremely visible in the areas in which they took place. So like on the bottom, well, there on the top left, that's Lynchburg. That iron bridge was sat in the James River in Lynchburg for a quarter of a century until the Garden Club of Lynchburg managed to get it out, raised the funds to get it out. It was built in 1912, it was swept loose by a flood in 1985, and it sat there as an eyesore and a disgrace and a hazard, and that was extremely visible to have that go away. Now, in this period of the last 50 years, the Garden Club is not in alone on it. There are a number of other organizations in the state that are joining this effort. And of course, that was one of the goals all along with the Garden Club, to get others to participate in it. So we have a couple of images here that that address some of that introduce some of the organizations. On the top right is an image from the Virginia Conservation Network. It was established in 1969, and it has 125 partners, and its purpose was to have a presence always at the state capitol as lawmakers were deciding laws. So that it lobbies for preservation of the environment. So that's the Virginia Conservation Network. Over on the bottom left is a group called Virginia Forever, established in 2006. And it's a coalition of all sorts of people: corporate, environmental, agriculture, outdoor enthusiasts, tourist persons, recreation persons, the seafood industry, and they all realize, and all these names they tell you what they're after. They realize that Virginia's beautiful landscape has to be preserved forever. or it's going to have an enormously downward impact on all those areas. So that's the purpose of Virginia Forever. And then in the middle of Scenic Virginia, it does exactly what its name says. They're concerned about particularly scenic landscapes and preserving of those. And the Garden Club was involved in establishing this group in 1998. And if you take the Richmond newspaper, you'll notice it seems almost every other day in the editorial page, instead of an editorial cartoon, as a photograph from Scenic Virginia. And of course, it's a breathtaking photograph. And then on the bottom right is the state agency, the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. It's the old Virginia Department of Conservation that was there in 1926 that the Garden Club worked with when the Shenandoah National Park was founded. And it's a very important entity because it manages, there are now 40 state parks and 60 nature preserves, and the Virginia the Virginia Department of Conservation is responsible for all of that. And appropriately, the Garden Club, to celebrate its 100th anniversary, decided to contribute to the Virginia Department of Conservation by dispersing $500,000 to help maintain the parks. And 29 of the 40 state parks participated in this program, and they were with programs to, for example, to improve the trails, the trails around the park, to improve the visitor center, to improve the landscaping, to add educational panels. So that was an appropriate and important contribution the Garden Club made to celebrate its anniversary. Now, the show is arranged in a clockwise manner, and in the center, we celebrate Historic Garden Week, because that is really the signature event of the club. And in there, include a number of objects that are interesting. One of the favorites is the Nancy Drew mystery. It's set in Garden Week in the 1950s, and in this novel, the novel takes place in Charlottesville during Garden Week, and Cumberland Manor is not open for Garden Week as it usually is. Why? So you have to read the book to find out why. We have scattered in there a number of the brochures for Garden Week over the past 88 years, and this year, of course, it had to be canceled because of the virus. Because the only other time that happened was during World War II. So it's been going for 88 years. And one of the favorite entities in this show is we have a film that you can listen to that was produced, as you can see, Esso, which is now Exxon Gas, in the 1950s, to encourage you to go to Virginia and to Garden Week. And of course, you'll need a lot of gas. Buy Esso gasoline and enjoy it. And it's a trip back in time to look at this film, and it's fascinating. Of course, the gardens are all the same; they haven't changed. And maybe the biggest surprise that these two people leading the tour are wearing clothes that don't look that odd. Come full cycle. So we can leave this up and let you enjoy that, and open this up to any questions if anybody would like.
Bill, I have a question. When you were mentioning the restoration of the gardens at the historic homes, do you have an idea about how long a garden restoration can take? Does it just really depend on?
That's an interesting question, because it takes forever. Because once it's done, the Garden Club requires that the standards that they establish be maintained every year. And they require attendance by the people maintaining those gardens to come to Richmond to the Kent Valentine House and to attend a program which reviews all of the things they're supposed to be doing. And so there are a few examples where the places have not kept up, and so they're no longer preserved. But for the most part, they've all done it. And these are all public buildings. And you can see in the background the stylish tour participants in the 1950s. Forgot what I was saying. Where was I, Elizabeth?
That it takes a long time and it really never ends, that you have to keep up your certification.
Right, and these are all public buildings. Oh, I was going to say that in this section about Garden Week, there are a number of awards that have been given, like one from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It goes on length in the citation, saying you've restored gardens that are associated with vitally important pieces of architecture that were the homes of famous American statesmen, of presidents, etc. And that's an amazing accomplishment. And we could have done the whole exhibition just showing awards that the Garden Club has received over the last 100 years, because there are lots of them from all sorts of places, from the National Garden Club, from the state of Virginia, and ones like the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which really says a lot to receive that award.
You somewhat touched on this earlier, Bill, but what would be, if for our members who are going to visit this exhibition in person, now that you've done such a wonderful overview, what would you say the top 3 can't miss items are in the exhibition when you visit?
Well, I think this is going to be a personal choice. And I already pointed to some of the ones that I found most interesting. I found the example of what the landscape could have been. Well, you're not going to be able to miss that point when you go, because we've got it's an 8-foot tall blow up of Tom Creek in Wise County, showing what went wrong there. I'm particularly taken by the example that the Garden Club members made for us of the 3 flower decorations, and explaining why one was more successful than the others. I found that one particularly interesting. And Haley's really good at this. She's getting to these pictures very quickly. This is as good as a real tour. And then I think I would always turn to the examples of the restorations. We showed in detail 5 of the garden restorations. I didn't have time to go into them all right now, and we of course couldn't show all 50 of them in the show, so we just picked a few of them almost randomly. One of them's Monticello, and another one's Poplar Forest, Jefferson's retreat, when too many people came to visit him in Monticello. And what they've done there is really remarkable. Poplar Forest is going on. It's there right now. The last time I visited Poplar Forest was, I think, decades ago, and the boxwoods were like 10 feet tall. You couldn't even see the house. And they've gone and removed all of that, excavated, and found it exactly what it looked like in Jefferson's time. So these contributions are highly significant, and I think that's certainly worth looking at.
And we have a couple more questions in the chat. So one of them is about the papers of the Garden Club of Virginia. So can you talk about where those are stored?
Well, they're stored at the Garden Club, and I would be remiss to say that we couldn't have put this show together without not only the papers, but the expertise of Garden Club members like Joanna Catron and Jeanette Cadwallader and Missy Buckingham that helped us with that material. I think it might have taken 100 years to put this show up if we hadn't had that help.
Right,
So
and I believe that, and I think that some of the restoration documents are held here at the museum as well.
And they are here. They are held here. But a number of the Garden Club, the number of the garden restoration projects are here. Those records are here. But the Garden Club itself has a number of the actual documents, like the letter from the Director of Publicity for the Shenandoah National Park. So there are a lot of documents that are still at the Garden Club of Virginia
And
in
then,
Kent Valentine House.
and then another question from one of our members is there a list online of all the gardens that are restored?
The Garden Club of Virginia has a wonderful website. It's a very impressive and helpful website. And you can go there to restorations and learn about them there. And if you think this exhibition is particularly handsome, which I do, I think our designers did a remarkable job with it. They took their inspiration from the Garden Club's own website because it's beautifully done. And a lot of the colors that we used in this exhibition we took from their website. And there's another program they've started. They don't have time to go into. We have an example of this in the show. They're empowering students, funding students to do research on privately owned houses and properties to study the landscape there, because they're important as well. But they've given, they need to be documented, and the students' jobs is to find out as much as they can about what the landscape used to be, and then document what it is today. And so those records will be preserved. And these are for privately owned houses. They're not open to the public, but it's still important. So all of the money goes to for the restorations goes to places that are public and open to the public.
And then another question in the chat is, what was the most interesting thing you learned when developing this exhibition?
Right.
If you only had to pick one.
I think two is one about the ladies with their chauffeurs and yard men cutting down 4,000 billboards. That was certainly, you don't want to miss that fact. I found very interesting the garden arrangement display that the Garden Club members put together for us to explain why some displays are better, and particularly in the case we did with respect to how color is used. So I found that very interesting.
And
it's a good show to learn about. I love doing shows where I can learn. And there's certainly a lot to learn in this. So I'd invite people to come see this show just to learn.
Right. And in honoring people's time, so we are going to have a couple more minutes for folks to ask questions. I will throw in now, since Bill has said to come visit it in person, there have been a few questions about how you should come to the museum. So as members, of course, admission for you is free. However, we are recommending that you reserve a ticket online before you come, just to make sure that we aren't exceeding the number of visitors that we allow in for the time slot. And you can do that at virginiahistory.org, or you can very easily call our main line to buy a ticket, and Haley, our wonderful tech guru, is demonstrating here where you would go on our website to reserve your ticket. And if you have any issues, you can always give us a call on our main line, or you can reach out to me or any of your contacts at the museum. And let's see if we've got more chats. We do also have in our shop, we do have the catalog for the exhibition that is available to take it with you and keep it as a memento of your visit. So it's got some great highlights from the exhibition in there as well. And just checking to see.
And we will be producing at some point, Haley, a virtual tour online where you can go without a person speaking, but you can visually go through the exhibition and click on certain images and receive and read some information, read some of the label copy. So that's in the works too.
And then we do have a
but
question.
You got to come to see the show.
Yes.
You need to come to see the show. And I think you're going to find it easy to get a ticket, and then you don't have to worry about anything if you get a ticket.
And then questions about a virtual tour, when it will be available. We are working on it, so we will let you know when that becomes available. We're all getting hip to the new times of making all of our, or making as many as possible of our exhibitions virtual. So we're getting it together as quickly as we can. So hopefully next week the digital program will be available, and we will of course update you via email. That's the best way to keep in touch with us. And if you aren't already subscribed to our email list, you can also do that on our website. To honor everyone's time, it looks like I've got one more question that we could touch on. So just the last few minutes, if you have a question, feel free to add to the chat. There is one that, is there a chance the Garden Club may make some of its old brochures available again? So you highlighted the brochure about the wildflower. So I'm not sure we could raise that question with the Garden Club, because I think Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they might have a better answer to that than we do. But I think that wildflower pamphlet does look interesting.
Yeah. If there are enough requests, then it might be economically feasible.
Right. Right. All right, well, everyone, just before we sign off, Bill, thank you so much. This has been wonderful, and I do hope, echo what we've said before, I hope that our members will come visit it in person. And just as a promotion for our next Curator conversation that will be a month from now, we're so happy that this new program has been well received by our members. So we'll be sending out an email in the next few weeks that will give you more details, but mark your calendars. The next program will be August 10th, and it will focus on our Agents of Change exhibition, and it will feature our curator, Dr. Karen Sherry. So be on the lookout for emails about that upcoming. If you have any questions that you think of later that you want to ask us, feel free to either email myself, and I'm putting my email address in the chat, or you can email Bill as well, and I am putting his email in the chat as well. And with that, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next program. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much for being a member.